Hi everybody, this is Della from The Beauty of Play. I had some questions about this book, Painting and Drawing in Waldorf Schools, and I thought I would do an inside look into the book and give my personal review of it. So I'm going to start with the table of contents, which are right here. Let's make sure you can see all that. And then just do a flip through the book. So it does give an introduction, and it has some adult information for the teacher in the beginning of the book that I personally found very interesting and useful, as my background is in math and science and not art. It goes over colors and composition, contrast, and the golden ratio, using ratios in art. And then, let's see here, they have this entire chapter on 12 exercises devised by Lojos Boros. I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly. This I found super interesting, and someday I would really like to go through these exercises. But again, this is so far adult material. It goes over positive and negative, color contrast, form relationships, formats, and composition. It gives a little history about the painter and some color theory, which I always love. And then it went into different assignments. Again, this is adult, in different colors, and it is just really interesting. I feel like it does have a chapter on form drawing, and it goes over figures, lines as pictorial, children's drawing, teaching steps, and from line to plane. However, as useful as this information was, I don't think it's comprehensive enough to use by itself. I think other resources are needed for that. After form drawing, it has a chapter on free guided drawing, and it has a little bit of broad information for a teacher on how to do free drawings and guided drawings, but it again doesn't give enough information to implement these for someone that does not have an art background like myself. Beautiful examples, but not explicit instructions like it has for wet on wet. Then it goes on to talk about the rules of painting for wet on wet and how the limitations and frameworks that they provide enhance the child's experience. There's a complete chapter on that, and they do a lot of focusing on contrast and composition and color theory, which I really enjoy, though they're not using those words with the children. I think wet on wet watercolor is ingenious for learning color theory at such a young age, almost intuitively. And then it talks about a chapter with the school years and art in general. And then finally we come to class 1. And here it goes grade by grade. You can see class 1, class 2, let's move that down. It's color coded here. Class 3, and they use the classic color for the ages as they move up into more cool colors. And this goes from grades 1 through grades 8. And the wonderful thing about this, it does give you a little bit of background, but it gives clear lessons, like this is a lesson, things to consider, the assignment, notes before you begin, and for each lesson it gives a clear example of what you're going towards. And for class 1, and this is the downfall, I think, of the book, it's explicitly wet on wet. It doesn't have any lessons for free drawing or for guided drawing or using any other medium than just wet on wet watercolors. And though I think it's a wonderful resource for wet on wet, I feel like it's lacking for the overall art experience for a child. And that's where weekly Waldorfish art came in for us, because I feel like it fills in all the gaps for that. So this is through class 1, and then it goes into 2nd grade. And the wonderful thing about it is, if you are following the Waldorf pedagogy and are looking at fables and legends, this book follows that sequence. And so when they start to experience form from color, those fables are listed in this book. The downside to that is, if you didn't follow the exact timeline for Waldorf pedagogy like myself, these aren't always applicable to what you're doing. Or if you are of a different culture, or integrating different cultures into your homeschool for more diversity, these also are kind of limited in that way. And again, for class 2, it's all wet on wet. And though, again, I think wet on wet is an ingenious way to teach color theory and art, I think for a full comprehensive experience, you need other types of art, other types of media, and that's not included in this. In 3rd grade is the same, more wet on wet. It also goes over the typical stories. A lot of these in this one are Bible stories. And it has a leaf collage for 3rd grade, but that's the only other medium used. For 4th grade, it goes over Norse mythology, man and animals, and cave painting. So again, if you are following the timeline for Waldorf pedagogy, then this works out perfect. They do have, it's still painting, but they do have one lesson that is separate, it's different from wet on wet. And grade 5 is also a lot of wet on wet. It goes over botany and Greek mythology. And this is where I think it starts to really excel again, is class 6. In 6th grade, they do black and white drawings. They look at light and shadow and plain color. There are other media mixed into this, but most of it is the classical black and white that's introduced at 6th grade for this age group. And I think it does a fabulous job with these lessons. Like the wet on wet, it has considerations, it has clear assignments, and then it has several examples of what the exercise is to look like what they're going for. And then it also has notes for each of the lessons. It does have, at the end of 6th grade, some color study. We did this with my older son, and it's beautiful, and it does take some time. This is it's a more difficult assignment than what it looks. And then it has some contrasting and color complements study here. Looking to see, there's some poster work, and that's basically the end of 6th grade. In 7th, they're also continuing with the black and white, but in addition to that, they're bringing in color perspective and linear perspective. So you start perspective drawings. The black and white drawings are more complex in this 7th grade sections, and you're often drawing inanimate objects, still life objects. Then they move on to perspective. There is some painting, but then they move into linear perspective and how that works for perspective drawing. They go over a little bit of history. I think Leonardo da Vinci was one of the first that used this kind of drawing, or maybe just perfected this type of drawing. And different instruments that they used. We did not do this experiment. And different exercises that really lend the eye to being able to see perspective drawings. And then several perspective drawing exercises, lessons to do. And then at the end it has a couple collages. Actually, it's just one collage exercise. For 8th grade, they continue with the black and white, they continue with the color studies and the perspective drawings, and then they bring in modeling, printmaking, and a little more collage work. So a lot of this is in 8th grade, and in Waldorf pedagogy they also study geometric solids. So there's a lot of geometric solid sketching here. And then more complex still life. And then they're doing black and white perspective drawing. And the perspective drawing gets a little more complicated. It's not just a vanishing point off to the side anymore. And this one you can see the vanishing point is within the room. And yes, and 2-point perspective drawing also comes into play here. And then there's some color theory exercises in this one, also mixed in with the perspective drawing. And then they go back to anatomy. And these are, still lifes are definitely more complicated than what they have been before. And then a little more contrast study and color study. When they do contrast, they do both contrast in light and dark, and also in complementary colors. And the last is a linoleum print. So in the later grades, there's a little more diversity in the different mediums and type of art they're doing. In the early age for the lessons, they're mostly wet on wet. They do have some general guidelines for drawing and for form drawing, but I don't think they're enough with this book alone to do that. Hope you enjoyed the video.